Good morning, students. I am Ma'am DeCosta, and I will be teaching you English for this period of time. I will start with The Merchant of Venice, Act 1, Scene 1. I hope that all of you, or most of you, have purchased the book. The text that we will use is The Merchant of Venice, a Verity edition by Xavier Pinto, and the publishers are Morning Star. Before I begin the teaching of the text, I would like to give you a brief background as to what you will be studying from this text. All of you have studied The Merchant of Venice in class 7 from the tales of Shakespeare. At that time, the text was in regular English and it was broken up into various chapters. Now, we will be studying the text according to the Shakespearean language. So, all the speeches that you study are given in the Shakespearean text, the meanings of which are given at the side. When I use the word meanings, I mean the meanings of certain words or explanation of lines which may seem difficult. So all of you are familiar with the plot of the play, The Merchant of Venice. In this, we have two major plots. One is revolving Antonio, the rich merchant of Venice, his friend Bassanio, who comes to borrow 3,000 ducats, but since Antonio doesn't have it at that time, he tells his friend to go to any money lender and borrow the money in his name, that is Antonio's name. Antonio would stand as a guarantor for this loan, which Bassanio will take from any of the money lenders in Venice. This is where the first scene ends. Act 1, Scene 2, I'll just give you a brief background. It deals with Portia, who's talking to her lady in waiting, that is Nerissa. She tells her about the limitations that her father has kept on her, the limitations of not marrying a man she loves, but has to marry a man who chooses the right casket. Ever since this news went around, suitors from all over the world have come to try their luck with Portia. This has made Portia extremely weary and tired, and she is almost fed up with all this practice. So Nerissa takes the names of these suitors one by one and she describes them and tells them how she is not very happy about this condition which was placed by her father. In scene 3, we will be introduced to another important character who is Shylock, a Jew and a moneylender. Incidentally, Bassanio went to Shylock to borrow 3,000 ducats. Shylock was a little hesitant to lend the money when he got to know that Antonio would be a guarantor. But on being convinced that Antonio will be able to give the money, he agreed to give Bassanio the loan on a condition that if Antonio is unable to pay the money back in 3 months' time, Shylock will take a pound of flesh from any part of his body. So this is a brief background of the 3 scenes of Act 1. Now coming to Act 1, Scene 1, the scene which I will be teaching you presently is a scene which highlights Antonio, the main character, but he has been portrayed as a sad person. and his friends wonder what could be the cause of his sadness. Some of them think that he must be sad as he's a rich merchant and his merchandise is scattered all over the world. Graciano, who's another loyal friend of Antonio, tells him that he would like to play the part of a fool and he would like to amuse Antonio and himself be merry at all times. He would like to heat his liver with wine rather than cool it with mournful groans. At the end of the scene, Bassanio comes in and requests Antonio to grant him a loan. He conveys the purpose of taking the loan, and Antonio tells him that since he does not have any ready money, he could go and borrow the money from any moneylender. So this is the main plot of scene 1. As you can see that I have opened the page to the characters in the play. It is important for you to be familiar with these characters who will be coming in the play from time to time from one scene to another. So the whole play is divided into 5 acts. In class 9, we will study Act 1, 2, and from Act 3, we will study Scene 1. As you know that in the literature paper, we have 3 sections. Section A is the drama section, that is the Merchant of Venice, which I will be teaching you. Section B is the poetry section, and in class 9 you will be doing 6 poems, 3 per term. Then you have 6 short stories, again you will be doing 3 per term, and these 3 sections make up your literature paper. So now that you have a fair enough idea as to what you're going to study in literature, I will begin with the play. So at the very onset, let us get familiar with the characters in the play. Number 1 is the Duke of Venice, the Prince of Morocco, the Prince of Aragon, who are the suitors to Portia. They will feature in Act 2. Antonio is a rich merchant of Venice. Bassanio, his best friend and a suitor to Portia. Graciano is another friend and in love with Nerissa. Lorenzo, another friend of Antonio, who is in love with Jessica. Leonardo is a servant to Bassanio. 3 other friends of Antonio are Salarino, Salanio, and Salerio. These 3 friends feature in the very beginning of the play. Then another important character is Shylock, a rich Jew and a moneylender. Jessica, who is Shylock's daughter. Tubal is another Jew and Shylock's friend. Launcelot Gobbo, a clown and a servant to Shylock. Old Gobbo is Launcelot's father and he plays a very minor role in the play. Again in Act 2. Portia, an heiress of Belmont. Nerissa, her lady in waiting. Balthazar and Stefano are the servants to Portia. Other characters, very minor characters, merchants, officers of the court of justice, a jailer, musicians, servants to Portia, and other attendants. The action of the play takes place in Venice and Belmont. So, having understood the characters of the play, we will now move to the first page of our text, and that is page number 21, Act 1, Scene 1. I will first read the paraphrase to you so that you will know exactly what we are going to study in this scene. The opening scene gives the exposition. Exposition is you're exposed to, you will get to know the situation on which the story is based. We are introduced to Antonio, the merchant who gives the title to the play. Interest is heightened by showing him in a melancholic mood. The word melancholic means sad. Salarino and Salanio, his friends, gave various reasons for his sadness and tried to bring him out of it. Bassanio, the closest friend of Antonio, asked for a loan from him in order to present himself as an eligible is suitable, suitor to Portia, a rich heiress of Belmont. Antonio's ships are still at sea. He has no ready cash with him, but he authorizes Bassanio to use his good name for credit and get a loan from the money lenders. The first scene takes place in Venice. Please underline the location of the scene. It is very important that every time we start a scene, you must know where the speakers are standing. So the first scene is in Venice, a street. The characters presented in this scene are, underline their names, Antonio, Salarino, and Salanio. Now before I start teaching the speeches to you, please take a look at the meanings which are given to you on the right hand side of the page. Some of the words are explained, and in some cases you have lines explained to you. For example, lines number 6 and 7 has a complete explanation. In most of the places we have the words which are explained for your better understanding. So I will now read one speech at a time, and I am going to explain it to you slowly and carefully. Please keep your pencil in your hand, and wherever I ask you to underline or make a note, please do so. Antonio, in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me, you say it wearies you. But how I caught it, found it, or came by it, what stuff 'tis made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. And such a want with sadness makes of me that I have much ado to know myself. At the very onset, the beginning of the play, as we have read in the paraphrase, that Antonio is presented as a sad person. He is in a melancholic mood. Now he is explaining his friends Salarino and Salanio. He says, in sooth, I know not why I am so sad. In sooth means in truth, truly. He is himself confused. He does not know why he is so sad. He moves on to say that his sadness, it wearies me, you say it wearies you. Antonio tells his friends that this sadness makes me very tired. And his friends who see him tired and his friends who see him sad also makes them tired. They too feel tired on seeing Antonio in a melancholic mood. Then he goes on to say, but how I caught it, found it, or came by it. He tells his friends, I really do not know how I have acquired it. Please look at the meaning of the word caught. Caught is acquired. Found it, how did I find it? Or come by it. Come by it means how I got this kind of sadness. I really do not know. What stuff 'tis made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. Antonio tells his friends, I am yet to understand what is the sadness made up of, whereof it is born. Whereof means what is its origin. I am to learn. I am to learn is I am yet to learn. And such a want with sadness makes of me that I have much ado to know myself. And such a want with sadness. Want with means an absent-minded fellow. makes of me that I have much ado. Much ado means I am so troubled that I really do not know who I am. Antonio has explained this. He says that this sadness makes me so absent minded that I do not know who I am. He is perplexed, he is confused. The sadness makes him an absent minded person. He does not really know who he is. So that is the opening speech by Antonio. Now moving on to Salarino. What does Salarino have to say? Your mind is tossing on the ocean, there where your argosies with portly sail, like seigneurs and rich burghers on the flood, or as it were the pageants of the sea, do overpeer the petty traffickers, that courtesy to them do them reverence, as they fly by them with their woven wings. Salarino tries to find a reason for Antonio's sadness, and he says, your mind is tossing on the ocean. He tells Antonio, your mind is occupied on the ocean. You are constantly thinking about your merchandise, which are rich merchandise ships which are sailing on the ocean. He says, there where your argosies with portly sails. Argosies, boys, means big commercial ships. Antonio, being a rich merchant, has huge commercial ships, and he has sent them out to various countries all over the world, the places that he trades with on a regular business. So Salarino says that Antonio's mind is tossing on the ocean, where his rich merchandise with portly sails are stately sails, rich satin and silk sails. They are sailing on the ocean, and Antonio's mind is occupied thinking about it, thinking about them, and this makes him very sad. Now, line number 10, please underline the word like. Over here, Salarino uses a figure of speech which is a simile. A simile is a word which is used to show comparison. First, I will explain the lines and then I will tell you what comparison has been used over here. Salarino says he compares Antonio's ships to seigneurs and rich burghers on the flood. Seigneurs, as you can see at the side, mean gentlemen, and rich burghers are the important citizens that are sailing on the sea, or as it were the pageants of the sea. As it were, they have been compared to a ceremonial procession which is on the sea. The rich merchandise ships are sailing in a ceremonious procession on the sea. These merchandise ships have been compared to the gentlemen and the important citizens of Venice. They do overpeer the petty traffickers. Who are the petty traffickers? The petty traffickers are the small commercial boats. They are the rich merchandise ships. They overpeer the petty traffickers. Overpeer is surpass. They sail in a very graceful and elegant manner, and while they are sailing, they surpass the small commercial boats. That courtesy to them do them reference. As the rich merchandise ships surpass the small commercial boats, these boats seem to bow down in respect in front of or by the side of the rich merchandise ship. That courtesy them do them reverence. As explained on the side, The commercial boats, they move up and down as if they were showing respect to the rich merchandise ship. And they fly by, given below, they speed past them with their woven wings. Woven wings are the canvas sails. Now, what is the comparison over here? The comparison is that Salarino considers the rich merchandise ships, or rather compares the rich merchandise ships to the rich gentlemen and important citizens who walk down the streets of Venice. When they walk down the streets of Venice, the ordinary citizens bow down to give them the respect that they deserve. Similarly, when the huge merchandise ships with portly sails sail on the ocean, the small commercial boats seem to be passing by them quickly, and they bow before them as if they were giving them or owing them respect with their canvas sails. So I hope you have understood these two speeches. They are simple and you just have to follow the explanation. Moving on to the next page. Now Salanio is another friend of Antonio, and he says, "Believe me, sir, had I such venture forth, the better part of my affections would be with my hopes abroad. I should be still plucking the grass to know where sits the wind, peering in maps for ports and piers and roads, and every object that might make me fear misfortune to my ventures, out of doubt would make me sad." Salanio is trying to tell Antonio that if he were a rich merchant like Antonio, and if he had such business operations, venture means business operations. Boys, please keep shifting your eyes from the right to the left of the book. So he says that if I had such business operations, the better part of my affections. What is the better part? Better part means his feelings. Most of his feelings would be on his ventures which are sailing abroad. He would constantly be thinking about his commercial boats, his commercial ships, his rich merchandise ships. Now you'll wonder, why would he be thinking about his rich commercial ships? When the ships are sailing at sea, there are many threats that it has to encounter, and a merchant will constantly be thinking about these threats. Some of the threats that encounter a ship are the winds, the pirates, the sea rats, the hidden rocks, and the sandbags. So these are some of the threats that constantly worry the mind of a merchant when his ship is sailing. So Salanio is telling Antonio that most of his feelings would be on his ships that are sailing abroad. He says, I should be still plucking the grass. Still plucking the grass means if Salanio was a rich merchant like Antonio, he would always be sitting worrying about his ship. And what would he be doing? He would pluck a blade of grass, hold it up to see in which direction the wind is blowing. To know where sits the wind. Sits the wind, explained at the side, is in which direction the wind is blowing. To understand whether his ship is sailing in the right direction and if the winds are favorable. Then he would be peering, explained at the side, looking very carefully into ports and piers. Piers are harbors, and roads are the water channels through which these commercial ships would be sailing. So he would be studying from time to time about the various ports where his ships would be entering. The piers are the harbors and the water channels to ensure the safety of his ship. And then he would think of every object that might make me fear misfortune to my ventures. Every object, I just explained to you what those objects are: the wind, the pirates, the rocks, and the sandbags. And he would keep contemplating, he would keep worrying about these objects that might make me fear. Make me fear means he would constantly be worried, and that worry would make him sad. So Salanio is telling Antonio that he probably is sad because of his ventures that have been sent out to various parts of the world. And if he were as rich as Antonio, then he too would be worried and sad. So I hope you have understood this speech. Now we are moving on to another speech, that is the speech of Salarino. Salarino says, "My wind cooling my broth would blow me to an ague when I thought what harm a wind too great at sea might do. I should not see the sandy hourglass run, but I should think of shallows and of flats, and see my wealthy Andrew docked in sand, veiling her high top lower than her ribs to kiss her burial. Should I go to church and see the holy edifice of stone, and not bethink me straight of dangerous rocks, which touching but my gentle vessel's side, would scatter all her spices in the stream, enrobe the roaring waters with my silks, and in a word, but even now worth this, and now worth nothing? Shall I have the thought to think on this, and shall I lack the thought that such a thing be chanced would make me sad? But tell not me, I know Antonio is sad to think upon his merchandise." So now this is a very important speech, because there are many aspects that Salarino keeps in mind when he talks about the dangers at sea. So please pick up your pencil again and mark the following things as I am explaining to you. Salarino says, "My wind cooling my broth." The meaning of the word wind over here is my breath, and broth is soup. My wind cooling my broth. When Salarino is holding a bowl of soup in his hand and blowing it to make it cool, that breath would blow me to an ague. Blow me to an ague means it would make me shiver as if I had high fever. When I thought what harm a wind too great at sea might do. Please circle the word wind in the first line, my wind. This wind is the breath which is cooling the soup that he is drinking. Every time he blows onto the soup, that breath would make him shiver as if he has high fever. And why would he shiver? Because he would think what harm a wind too great at sea might do. The breath coming out from his mouth would remind him of the wind which is blowing rapidly and fiercely at sea, and how it would be a cause of the destruction of his ship. In case there is a wild and dangerous storm at sea, it would be disastrous for his ship. So please understand these three lines. My wind is the breath. He is comparing his wind to the wind which is blowing across the sea, and he fears that if the wind is unfavorable, it might bring damage and destruction to his ship. Now the second point, I should not see the sandy hourglass run. Underline the sandy hourglass. Now let us have a look at the meaning of the word sandy hourglass. It is an apparatus which has two spheres of glass joined together with a tiny hole between, through which the sand runs from one sphere to the other in 1 hour. The apparatus was used to indicate time before watches became common. So what is the aspect of the sand? The sight of the sand in the glass would remind one of the dangers from hidden sandbanks at sea, on which the ship may run aground. Now what does Saladino have to say? He says that every time he looked at a sandy hourglass and saw the sand running from the top to the bottom, he would think of the shallow sandbanks, all right, the hidden sandbanks that lie under the waters, and it is extremely threatening, it is extremely dangerous, and you cannot even make them out until the ship has run aground. So the sand in the hourglass would remind him, please put point number 2 on top of sandy hourglass, it would remind him of the shallow sandbanks that are hidden under the waters of the ocean. And he would worry that his wealthy Andrew would be docked in sand. What is a wealthy Andrew? Wealthy Andrew is a common name given for a big ship. Shallows are the shallow waters, all right? So, and I would think of shallows and of flats. Shallows are the shallow waters, flats are the sandbanks. And if the ship runs a risk, his merchandise ship would get stuck in the sandbanks. Veiling her high top lower than her ribs. Veiling over here means that once the ship would get stuck in the sandbanks, there is no way that you can get it out, because it keeps getting embedded in the sand, it keeps getting stuck in the sand and it cannot come out. And gradually what happens is that the top of the ship, veiling her high top lower than her ribs. Look at the meaning. Veiling means lowering her top of the mast, it would come down to the sides of the ship. That means the ship would topple over in a period of time. The top part of the ship, the high part of the ship would lower itself and come down to the sides of the ship. Veiling her high top lower than her ribs to kiss her burial. Now explain to the side. To kiss her burial means to kiss the sand in which she is buried. She over here is the commercial ship, the rich merchandise ship. So this is the second fear that Saladino has, that when he looks at the hourglass, it would remind him of the shallow waters and the sandbanks in which his merchandise ship would get stuck, and over a period of time her high top mast would bend over and it would touch the lower part or the sides of the ship. Now the third point, should I go to church and see the holy edifice of stone? The third point is, these are the fears that Saladino has and how each thing would remind him of the dangers at sea. So he says that when he would go to church, he would say the holy edifice of stone. Holy edifice is building, the building of the church, all right, which is made up of stones. So when he looked at the stone of which from where the building is constructed, and not me think me straight of dangerous rocks. Not me think me means, and would it not remind him immediately of the dangerous rocks that lie hidden under the waters of the ocean. So the third fear that Salarino has is that if and when he would go to church and see the holy building and the stone with which the building is constructed, would it not straightway remind him of the dangerous rocks that lie under the water, and which could be the cause of wreckage of his ships? Which touching but my gentle vessel's side, which over here are the rocks touching his gentle vessel. Vessel is the ship, all right. So, and which touching his gentle vessel's side would scatter all her spices on the stream. Look at line number 32 explained to you. He says, and would the stones of the church not remind him of the dangerous rocks, and it would wreck the sides of his gentle vessel. Gentle vessel is the container or the ship, okay, and when it would damage the side of his ships, or it would scatter all her spices and on the stream and enrobe the roaring waters with myself. No sooner the rocks would damage the ship than all the spices and the silks that was contained in the ship would now enrobe the waters. It would be scattered on the waters of the sea. Enrobe the roaring waters with my silk. Enrobe is to cover the waters with the silk. Silk is the silk material which was being carried for commercial purposes. And in a word, but even now worth this, and now worth nothing. Look at lines number 36 and 37 given down. Just before a moment, the cargo was so valuable. In a word means in a moment. Just a little while ago, this ship was so valuable because it had silks, it had spices, it was richly laden, and now it is worth nothing. And no sooner the rocks damage the side of the ships, everything gets scattered on the sea, and the ship no longer is worth anything. Shall I have the thought? Now he says, shall I have the thought to think on this, and shall I lack the thought that such a thing be chance would make me sad? Look at the meanings of lines number 38 and 39. He says, if I can imagine all this could happen, shall I not also have the imagination to picture the grief which the occurrence of such a disaster could cause me? Now I will explain this meaning to you. What Salarino is trying to say is, if I could imagine, if I could only think, if I could only place in my mind, if I can imagine all this could happen, all these disasters could happen, all right, with the wind, with the rocks, and with the sandbanks. He says, shall I not have the imagination to picture the grief which the occurrence? And he says, if I can only imagine all the disasters that could take place, can I not imagine the sorrow, the grief which the occurrence of such a disaster could cause me? He's trying to say that if these things truly happen to my ship, if my ship gets destroyed either by the winds or the sandbanks or the rocks, then it would cause him immense grief. The disaster of losing all the wealth on the ship would cause him immense, a lot of grief. So the very thought of it makes him feel afraid. So you can imagine how much worse the fear would be if this thing would really happen. All right, to think on this, and shall I lack the thought that such a thing be chance would make me sad. And if the ship met with such disaster, it would really make him extremely sad. Then he says that, sorry, he says, I know, but tell not me, I know Antonio is sad to think upon his merchandise. Now, look at the meaning given on the other side. He says, but do not tell me that Antonio is sad about the possible dangers that his ship would encounter. So, the reason is because Antonio is a rich merchant and he has been trading for a period of time, and therefore the merchandise would not really be a reason for Antonio's sadness. So with this, I will end the teaching for today. Boys, I request you to please read these 4 speeches that I have explained to you carefully. Tomorrow, I will move on with the explanation of another 2 to 3 speeches, and then I will give you your written work. So I hope you have understood. Please read the text once again and understand the meanings I have given you. Thank you.